Good evening, children. Today I am going to continue the chapter that is Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. In the previous class, we have talked about the topic of changes after the October Revolution. The main discussion was on civil war, and today I am going to begin with the 5-year plans. For today, the topic is the 5-year plans. It comes in the heading of the global influence of the Russian Revolution. Now, what was the target? During that period, what was the target? The target was, planning was introduced with the introduction of 5-year plans. Economic growth began with the increased industrial production. Life of people was full of hardships with poor working conditions. A schooling system was modified. Factory workers and peasants could also enter universities. Crèches for factory workers. Children were set up. Public health care was taken care of, and more of living quarters were set up for the workers. So now, children, today I am going to start with the 5-year plan. As you know that in India also we are having the concept of 5-year plan. Means in advance the 5-year planning take place. Officials decided to set targets for 5-year period. After the assessment of economy, based on this, a 5-year plan was made. First 5-year plan was started. The first 5-year plan started in the year 1927 and lasted till 1932. Means total for 5 years, started from 1927 and it survived till 1932. The production did not increase. During that time, the production means the production could not increase suddenly. Even after collectivization. Collectivization means all the farmers, all those groups have combined together and they were doing the collective agriculture. So then also the production did not increase suddenly even after collectivization. The reason for this is because bad harvests in 1930-33. Bad harvest was there from the year 1930 to 1933. This led to famines. In Soviet Union, in which over 4 million people died. Nearly how many people died? 4 million people have died. After this, a remarkable progress was in the production of heavy machinery and mining. The second year plan was from the year 1933 to 1938. Remember, the first 5-year plan was from the year 1927 to 1932. The second 5-year plan began from 1933 to 1938. This second 5-year plan had a major thrust on the production of consumer goods. The third 5-year plan laid more emphasis on manufacture of armaments. Now, I am saying the third 5-year plan laid more importance or put more emphasis on manufacturing of armaments. Why? Because during that period, during the third 5-year period, there was the Second World War. The Second World War was from the year 1939 to 1945. So now the main condition was that during the third 5-year plan, more emphasis was on manufacturing of armaments, means weapons, considering the world crisis. In the year 1933, Russia reaped a record harvest. In the year 1933, a very strong harvest was there. They had become this was possible. This particular very record-breaking harvest means production. This was because this was only possible due to the state support to the collective farms. It was due to the government support what they were giving to the collective farms, or in other words it is known as kolkhoz, Kolkhoz, that was kolkhoz, and the state farms that were known as sovkhoz. Two kinds of farms were there. One was the kolkhoz and the other was the sovkhoz. Russia was able to move from a medieval economy to a great industrial power in few years. And what was the reaction of this? What was the impact of this? The impact of this production, heavy production was, or heavy harvesting was, that Russia was able to move from a medieval economy, means mid-sector economy, to a great industrial power. Now it became a very strong industrial power in certain years only. There was a very good industrial production between 1929 and 1933, and there was 100%. In which fields it was 100% production? In the case of oil, coal and steel. Three things I am taking name: oil, coal and steel. By this what will happen? All these three things, oil, coal and steel, it is needed for your industrialization. It is needed for your industries. So during this time, between the year of 1929 and 1933, there was a very good production between in the fields of oil, coal and steel. After this, the next point is, now let's move towards the point of education. My next point is education. When I talk about education, an extended schooling system, developed. It made possible for workers and peasants. It made possible for workers and peasants to enter universities. Now the children, workers or the peasants, they can also get admitted in the universities. A special preference for women workers. For women workers, there were creches. There were creches in the factories for their children. Means if the females are there, they are having their young ones, that young ones can stay in the factory creches. Living quarters were built. For that purpose only, living quarters were also made for workers. And cheap public health care. Cheap public health care means cheap hospitals. Cheap hospitals here means that the cost, the peasants or the laborers, they don't have to pay a very heavy amount. It was just like a government hospital. Such kind of facilities were provided, especially in the terms of living quarters were built for workers, cheap public health cares and crutches in the factory for the children. At that time, education received the maximum attention. Education received the maximum attention. There was provision for free education at all levels. Means free education was provided at all levels. Means from your nursery onwards, pre-primary onwards up to your schooling or degree colleges. Vast amount of money was spent on primary and secondary education. Now two terms I am saying. Enough amount or vast amount of money was spent on primary and secondary education. It means on your primary means up to class 5th and secondary means up to 8th. Till your class 8th, enough money was spent. Vocational training was given equal attention. Vocational training means that apart from your education, you are expert in other thing also. Means you can earn your livelihood. You can earn your livelihood by working at some other place. So vocational training was given equal attention. Citizens were having the right to work and unemployment was thus wiped out from Soviet Russia. Now what was the benefit of this? The benefit of this was that all the citizens were having the right to work and unemployment was thus wiped out. Wiped out means there was no unemployment prevailing in Soviet Russia. But rapidly industrialization led to poor working conditions too. Means more and more industries were opening and the conditions were becoming difficult. The city of Magnitogosk, the city of Magnitogosk is an example where a steel plant was constructed in 3 years. In this area, a steel plant was constructed in 3 years. Workers had to lead hard lives. There the working conditions, means the conditions of the workers was too difficult. Now what kind of problems were arising? Now population had increased, industries were increasing. So it's obvious thing, when more and more industries are opening, population in that area will increase. So there was no toilets. Just remember this problem. There were no toilets attached to the houses and people had to rush out in cold winter across the streets to find a toilet. Now very basic problem, a very minor thing but a very major problem. The problem was there was no toilets attached to the houses and people had to rush out in cold winter across the street to find a toilet. Now my next point is Joseph Stalin. The next point is Joseph Stalin and collectivization. So when we talk about Joseph Stalin, let's know about his birth. He was born in the year 1879 and he died in the year 1953. After Lenin's death, now Lenin has died in the year 1924. Lenin's death took place in the year 1924. There was a fierce power struggle within the party, and within the party itself there were lot of fights that who will become the next power. Between Joseph Stalin and Trotsky, two candidates were there. Enough good fight was there between Joseph Stalin and Trotsky. In the end, finally in the end, Stalin was successful. He became the leader of Russia and drove his rival Trotsky into exile. Now Trotsky was being given the punishment. Stalin concentrated all powers in his hands. Now all the powers of the government were in the hands of Stalin and virtually became a dictator. In other words, if I say this person, Stalin, became a dictator. Now what is the meaning of the word dictator? Can anyone tell me the meaning of the word dictator? Its example can be taken from Germany. That was Adolf Hitler. Just after the First World War, he became the dictator. The word dictator means when all the powers come in the hands of one person, no opposition, and there is totalitarian government. The word is totalitarian government. That system have started in Russia and the entire powers were in the hands of Stalin. Stalin is suspected of purging anyone who opposed him. Now one more controversy was there, that if any person is going against Stalin or thinking against him, then that person is going to be punished. The people purged by him were mostly communist leaders, veterans of the revolutions. The people, yes, correct answer given by Priyansh, a ruler with total power over a country, typically one who has obtained control by force. And that's for this particular word I was using totalitarian government. Totalitarian means the total powers are in the hands of one person. And this person was Stalin and he was from Russia. The people purged by him were mostly communist leaders. The people who were being punished by Joseph Stalin were the communist leaders. veterans of the revolutions. Veteran means the senior candidates of the revolution. Writers, artists, scientists, military and civilian officers. But Stalin planned to make Soviet Union an economic giant. But the mentality of Joseph Stalin was very economical. His plan was to make Soviet Union an economist giant through its 5-year plans and collectivization programs. Now, for this particular purpose, for the improvisation of economic conditions, he has started the concept of 5-year plans. In 1927, in the year 1927 and 1928, Soviet Russia was facing an acute problem of grain supplies. Remember this, children? In 1927-1928, Soviet Russia was facing an acute problem of grain supplies. The peasants refused to sell the grains at the price fixed by the government. All the peasants or the farmers, whatever rates were being fixed by the government, the peasants refused to sell their grains to the government because the rates were very less. Next point is, Stalin held a strong opinion that the peasants had surplus grain. Now, the thinking of Stalin was different. He was thinking that the farmers were having surplus. Surplus means extra grain, enough amount of grain, but were holding it back, especially higher, or you can say, according to the thinking of Joseph Stalin, the peasants had enough amount of grain, but the peasants were holding the grain, expecting for a higher price. The mentality of Stalin was that the farmers or the peasants, they don't want to sell out their grains at the government fixed rates because, according to him, the rates were less and the opinion or the expectation of the farmers was high. He took a decision to have collective farms. Now he took a decision, and the decision was of having collective farms. The decision was to do away with small sized peasant farms. The decision was to do away with, for especially those were small sized peasant farms. You know, the small farmers were being combined together and they had made their farms, and in their language it was known as kulaks, Kulaks, and eliminated them. In this manner they were eliminated. The small sized farms could not be modernized, but this small sized farms, you cannot do any kind of modernization in that. Instead of kulaks, state control. Now, on the one side, in the private sector, there were small farms which were known by the name of kulaks, but there was no scope of modernizing it. Instead of kulaks, state controlled large farms. State government was having control over large farms, were to be established, which could be modernized. And large farms, over large farms only, this modernization process can take place. Why? Because the size is big and it belongs to the government. From 1929, all peasants to work. From the year 1929, all peasants were forced to work in kolkhoz. What is the meaning of the word kolkhoz? It means collective farms. It means collective farms. The kolkhoz profit was shared by all the peasants who worked on the land. The kolkhoz profit. Okay, two words I am using. I have used two words. The first word is kulak. Let me tell you. Kulak means small sized peasants farms. The small farmers, the kind of farms which they were having, small sized, they were known as kulaks. On the other side, big farms. On the other side, big farms were there, collective farms were there, and that were known as kolkhos. Kulaks were the small ones and kolkhos were the big ones. And for this kolkhos, the government was supporting them in modernizing. The kolkhos profit was shared by all peasants. The kolkhos profit was shared by all peasants. But those peasants, those who worked on the land, Stalin's government allowed some independent cultivation. Stalin's government allowed some independent cultivation, but the state frowned on them and was unsympathetic towards such farmers. Production in such farms did not increase immediately. The production in such farms, especially in kolkhos, could not increase immediately. Soviet Russia, in fact, faced one of the disastrous famines. One of the most disastrous famines were from between 1930 to 1933. Nearly 4 million people died. Just think, between 1930 to 1933, 4 million people died. So what kind of famine it would have been? The peasants did not take readily. The peasants did not take readily to collective farming. So that's why the peasants were not ready to accept this collective farming. In rage, they destroyed their livestock and resisted the authorities. The number of cattle was reduced by 1/3. So what kind of destructions were them? The number of cattle was reduced by 1/3 between 1929 and 1931. Many peasants were severely punished for not joining collective farming. Means the peasants were forced for collective farming. Many of them were punished also. They were deported and exiled. These peasants, those who were not ready to accept collective farming, they were deported and exiled. Exiled means एक तरह के हम कह सकते हैं इनको काले पानी की सजा, मतलब दूर कर देना देश से. Peasants argued that they were not rich and did not want to work in collective farms for a variety of reasons. And the reason which was given by the peasants were, the peasants said that they were not rich, financially they are not rich, and they did not want to work in collective farms. Because what income they will get? Their income would be very less, their share will come very less. And several other reasons the peasants have kept. Though they were not against the idea of socialism, but these farmers, they were not against the idea of socialism, but they were against the idea of collective farming. Once again I am telling you the terms. Kulaks, the word kulaks means small sized peasant farms. Small sized peasant farms is known as kulak. Even some members of the Bolshevik party criticized Stalin's collectivization. Even the members of the Bolshevik party, they also criticized this step taken by Stalin. These members were charged by Stalin, and his followers with conspiring against socialism. Means those people, those were going against, especially the leaders, new kind of charges were raised on them. The charges were conspiring against socialism. More than 2 million people, just think, more than 2 million people were imprisoned by 1939. No one spoke on behalf of the prisoners, means there was no representative from the prisoners' side. Though the people knew the prisoners were innocent, although the people were aware that there is no mistake of the prisoners, but none of the leaders or none of the societies were having the courage to say against the government, to say anything against the government. Many professionals and talented people were among those who were tortured. Not only the peasants, but the professionals and talented people were also the people, those who suffered from torture. They were forced to make false confessions. And what was happening? Due to the torture, the people were forced to make false confession. Confession means kasam khana. They were forced to make false confessions and then executed. Means firstly a lot of power was shown against them, and the people were, in other manner we can say that the people were forced to have confession, and then only they were executed. Executed means then only they were released from the prison. My next point is the global influence of the Russian Revolution and the USSR. The global influence of the Russian Revolution. The socialist parties of Europe at the time, the socialist parties of Europe of that time did not entirely agree with or appreciated what the Bolsheviks were doing in Russia. At that time, the socialist parties were not appreciating the steps which were taken by the Bolsheviks. But the Bolsheviks were an inspiration to many workers. But these Bolsheviks were the inspirations for most of the workers, not only in Russia but in other countries also. Communist parties were formed in many countries. Communist parties were formed in several other nations. Communist Party of Great Britain, the Bolsheviks encouraged the colonial people to follow their pattern. The Bolsheviks encouraged the colonial people to follow their pattern. The Conference of the People of the East 1920 was attended by people from outside USSR. Means not only USSR but the other nations also. The Bolsheviks founded Comintern, an international union of pro-Bolshevik socialist parties, which also received attention and participation by many other countries. So this Conference of the People of the East, which held in 1920, was appreciated by several other candidates, other countries. Foreigners received education. So at that time, what was the scenario? Even the foreigners were receiving education in the USSR's University of the Workers of the East. But before the outbreak of the Second World War, USSR had become a powerful country. Means before the Second World War, USSR was on the first rank. Means it was the number one power. And socialism had gained global stature. Indians were also inspired by the Russian Revolution. In India also, we got the inspirations from Russia. By mid-1920s, Communist Party was formed in India. Many famous Indian personalities such as Jawaharlal Nehru, Rabindranath Tagore wrote about Soviet socialism. Many writings were written in different languages: Bengali, Marathi, Malayalam, Tamil and Telugu. But by the 1950s, it was clear that all was not well with the great power called the USSR. But till 1950s, it was clear that all was not well with the great power called the USSR. The style of government in the USSR was not according to the ideals of socialism. And after the Second World War, means from 1945 onwards, the Cold War have started. The period of Cold War. Now what is this Cold War? Can anyone tell me the meaning of the word Cold War? Any one of you? Vaibhav, Abhishek, Priyansh, Akhil, anyone? Rudra? What do you mean by Cold War? The word Cold War means you are ready with your arms and ammunitions, but the dates are not finalized. The nations are trying all the methods. The nations are trying to harm the other by all the methods, but not coming in front of each other. That was the method, means that was the Cold War. For example, the doctor says to you that you are suffering from this disease and you will die within a short period of time. But that short period of time, the date has not been mentioned. So what will happen? In that duration, the condition of the patient will become critical and critical. Means from his inner conscience only, he will be always thinking that when I am going to die. It had made great progress. The style of government in the USSR was not according to the ideals of socialism. Yes, correct answer, Priyansh. Your answer is right. Especially the Cold War was between the capitalist and the communist. Capitalist was USA and communist was USSR. It had made great progress industrially and agriculturally, but it had denied essential freedom. The Russians have made progress in the terms of industries and agriculture, but they have denied the terms of freedom to its citizens. By the end of 1991, the USSR disintegrated and 15 new nations emerged. Now children, what is the meaning of this? Now, this term in 1991, what happened? The entire USSR, it blasted. Blasted means it got divided and 15 new nations from USSR only, 15 new nations emerged out. They declared themselves as independent nations. Now they were not under USSR. They were totally new nations with new names. Now, Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution is considered as a legacy. The Russian experiment has many lessons. The importance of profit as an incentive. The importance of profit as an incentive to bring out the best in human effort cannot be negated. Strict discipline does not help in bringing about quicker results. It doesn't mean that you are very disciplined, you are very strict. It doesn't mean that you will get the results very soon, but has a tendency to degenerate. Denial means your refusal of civil liberties leads to bottling up of discontent and explode in the form of a revolution. Means the people, for a duration of time, they can bear the difficulties, they can face the problems created by the government, but it cannot be taken as a guarantee, it cannot be taken as granted. And the same thing happened in Russia. Russia merged out, disintegrated, and 15 new nations emerged out from Russia. Progress under a democratic system with freedom of speech. Progress under a democratic system with freedom of speech and right to criticize could be relatively slow but it would be lasting and poses no threat to the very existence of the state. So I have completed my topic, children. So in a fast manner, I would just like to do the recapitulation. Rule of Bolsheviks was not approved by other existing socialist parties. The influence of Russian Revolution was felt worldwide. Communist parties were formed. In Great Britain, and colonial people began to experiment. Many Indian leaders talked about the Soviet socialism. The Indian leaders were, can you name any of the Indian leaders? They were Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Rabindranath Tagore. They were Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Rabindranath Tagore. By the end of the 20th century, international reputation of the USSR as socialist country declined, and it came up with the concept of communist. However, by the 1950s, it was felt that the existing government in the USSR did not keep up with the ideals of Russian Revolution. Okay, children. Any other point? Okay, I am just explaining. All of you listen carefully. The Russian Revolution legacy. Now, what was this? The Russian experiment has many lessons. After the Russian Revolution, several lessons have been shown. The importance of profit as an incentive to bring out the best in human effort cannot be negated. Strict discipline does not help in bringing about quicker results. Means if you are very strict, if you are taking your things in a very quick, in a very effective manner, it doesn't mean that the result will soon be declared, but has a tendency to degenerate. Denial of civil liberties. Denial means refusal of your fundamental rights. Refusal of your fundamental rights leads to bottling up of discontent and explode in the form of a revolution. Progress under a democratic system with freedom of speech and right to criticize could be relatively slow, but it would be lasting and poses no threat to the very existence of the state. Means the people, the other political parties, they were the sufferers. They would not enjoy to have their civil liberties, means their fundamental rights. So it was obvious that slowly and steadily this explosion was going to come, and this explosion was in the form of the disintegration of USSR into 15 new nations, which emerged out in the year 1991. So any kind of doubt, children? Any other doubt to anyone? You are free to ask. After this, I'll be doing my questions. So children, are you ready for the questions? Today I have changed the pattern. Hardly there would be one or two multiple choice question, hardly. And apart from that, other questions would be there. Means it can be you fill in the blank, or it can be a true and false. So there is a change in the pattern today. Let's come to the first question. My first question is, Priyans, Vaibhav, Raj, Abhishek, all of you. Be ready for the question. My question is, the Russian secret police. The Russian secret police was referred by which of the following names? Option A, Gestapo. Option B, Cheka. Option C, Central Intelligence Agency. And option D, Storm Troopers. So what's the answer, children? 4 options are there. You have to select one. Just tell the answer. Priyansh, Abhishek, Vaibhav. Okay, yes, Priyansh, your option is correct. Vaibhav Sachan, correct option. The answer is B. Option B. And the B option is Cheka. Now the next question. My next question is dash started. It is a fill in the blank. You have to give the answer. Dash started collectivization program in Russia. Dash started collectivization program in Russia. Type your answers fast, children. Akhil Tripathi, I need the answer. Type it fast. I am waiting for a response, children. Respond it fast. Today we have read the topic. Today I taught about it, that only. Okay, children. Priyansh, just think better. In the question, already Russia is given. So how it can be Soviet Union? My question is, dash started collectivization program in Russia. For this, the answer is no. The answer is wrong. For you, the answer is, it can be seen on your screen. The answer is Stalin. Stalin. Stalin started collectivization program. Now the next question. The next question is dash led the procession. Dash led the procession of workers to the event Bloody Sunday in Russia. The question is dash led the procession of workers to the event Bloody Sunday in Russia. So what should be the answer? Yes, children, give the answer for this. Okay, no one is typing the answer. So for this, the answer is Gapon. Gapon. The answer is Father Gapon. Yes, correct answer. COVID. Priyansh, Vaibhav, correct answer. That's Father Gapon. Correct answer. Now look the other question. 22nd February. It's an important question. 22nd February came to be known as dash. 22nd February came to be known as dash. What's the answer for this? World Thinking Day? No dear, the answer for this question is International Women's Day. The answer for this question is International Women's Day. 22nd February came to be known as the International Women's Day. Now, the next question. The next question is the last question for today. Dash was the writer of the Soviet state of Russia. Dash was the writer of the Soviet state of Russia. What's the answer? The answer for this question, anyone? Okay, so I am mentioning the answer. The answer for this question is S.D. Vidyalankar. The answer is S.D. Vidyalankar. That's the answer. No, the answer is what I have mentioned, SD Vidyalankar. So children, for today, this much only. Okay, Priyansh, okay. Okay, so for today, children, this much only. We'll be meeting in the next class with a new chapter.